I are going to be discussing ocean rescue needs analysis and various strength and conditioning and rehab considerations for this population. So I would lump this right back into our tactical athlete type of population, just like we did the first time when Lee was on the podcast, where we talked about firefighting and first responders and needs analysis for that. Really great episode. Really appreciate Lee and highly recommend you check out everything he's up to. Also highly recommend you check out our Season 5 sponsor, Isophit. Isophit is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. Enjoy. Lee, welcome back to the podcast. Super excited to work with you again today, man. Thanks for being here.
Dan, good talking to you again. I just wanted to tell you that our previous podcast that we had, at this point I've done a few, and I really enjoyed the fact that you and I got to a granular level on firefighting. And when people ask me about podcast or ask me about something, I'll send them your podcast because I'm kind of proud of that conversation and how it went. And I'm hoping we can duplicate that here today with the lifeguard side of the house.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. I really appreciate it. And as you mentioned, summer beach season is coming. And, one of the things, I know everyone wants to be beach ready and beach body ready, but I also want the first responders out there to be ready to handle whatever life throws at them from a work standpoint safely, so that they can not only do their job, but also keep themselves in a good spot. You mentioned that we had a great conversation earlier. For people who maybe didn't quite catch that, or maybe they aren't sure who you are, or they haven't heard of Kaizen yet, would you mind filling them in a little bit about your backstory and all?
My name is Lee Throckmorton, and I am a full-time strength and conditioning coach, and I recently retired from a 30-year career in public safety. 22 years of that was with the Ocean Rescue Lifeguard Service in Southeast Virginia, in concert with the fire department, where I had 26 years. I also dabbled a little bit in law enforcement before I realized that wasn't my path, and we shifted back to the fire and the ocean rescue. But currently, now that I've got a company that we're working hard to try to prepare tactical athletes, occupational athletes, whatever you want to call them, to be effective in the realm of public safety. Lifeguards included.
I was going to say, I love that you used the term tactical athlete for this, because to me, lifeguarding is a first responder type of thing, and you never know what conditions the water's going to be, what the weather's going to be, and so on that way. So this is really a tactical athlete kind of realm. And it's funny because usually when I say the term lifeguard, I think a lot of people in their head think of the 18-year-old blonde girl that weighs 110 pounds doing her summer job, when in reality, a lot of my college guys have actually tried out for the lifeguarding, my rugby guys and different ones that way. And, it's funny because a lot of them really struggled with the fitness test. And it's amazing to me that even, college athletes can sometimes struggle with the demands just to even, get the job in the first place. Before we get into any of the testing considerations and all that way, what exactly goes into ocean rescue? What did you spend over 2 decades doing yourself? And what did, your typical day-to-day and that sort of thing look like?
Let me define that for the listeners that might not, you think lifeguard might, encompasses a lot of venues.
Right.
But I'm going to delineate between maybe a pool or a water park lifeguard, indoor or even outdoor, where you're in a pool setting, versus ocean. And I'm talking coastal, not even necessarily lake. I would say almost a lake I would put in the same realm as a pool lifeguard. But the ocean itself and a coastline is a living, breathing entity, and it is constantly shifting. Not to sound dramatic, but the ocean has a life of its own, and if you do not respect it, it will snatch you up and take you. And that happens, unfortunately, to a lot of places that don't have lifeguards Full disclosure, I haven't been on the beach. Gosh, it snuck up on me. It's been 8 or 9 years since I've been out there. I have to assume, and I still have a lot of friends that are still on the job that I hang out with quite regularly, and it doesn't seem like much has changed. So I can probably speak intelligently to what's still going on. But you have to understand that a lot of municipalities are kind of different in the way they do business. Where I was located is in Southeast Virginia, which would be, as the crow flies, maybe 30, 45 minutes from the Outer Banks, which some people are familiar with. And I'd say we're probably 3 hours from your location up in Maryland, Delaware area. So that kind of puts us in a geographic location for you. The day to day was pretty much, you're mustering up a group of folks. They're being, depending on the time of year, depends on how many people were going to be working. We'd spread them out to their certain locations. As the season increased, we would have a higher density of patrons on the beach. We'd have a higher density of lifeguards, where it got to the point where there were, for about a 3-mile stretch of beach, there would be somebody every single block. Now, that wasn't the only area that I specifically worked with. It went, I want to say almost 5-6 miles worth of beach when it was all said and done that we were responsible with. But the bulk of it, where most of our work was done, was in a 3-mile resort area with, high-rise hotels and a boardwalk and, all the, what you would think of a tourist beach town. And it was, it depended, the day to day depended on what the conditions were, day of the week, the population density down there. We would do training every morning. And then after training was over, that would usually be about 11 o'clock. And then it was just work to keep everybody safe for the duration of the day.
Yeah, and what goes into that? Because I'd imagine you have to kind of test like the state of the water every day as well, because I know that we have like, high tide, low tide, that sort of thing. But you mentioned earlier that rip currents are a very real thing, and there's different ways to like actually assess those on the day to day, right?
And it's experience. And I used to kind of consider it when I didn't really know how to articulate. And for the folks that don't know, a rip current is going to be a channel of water moving away from the shore. When all the waves come in, that water has to go back out some way, and it usually finds an area of least resistance, and it will channel a lot of that water and run it out. A lot of times swimmers will get caught up in that rip current, and even accomplished swimmers have trouble swimming in the shore from that. Now, the lifeguards themselves get used to seeing that. You can see it, especially from the elevated area. With experience, you get to where you can kind of see it without even really thinking about it. And, going back to what I was saying earlier, I used to think it was a sixth sense, but it really turns out that the scientists are attributing it to pattern recognition. So as far as looking at, swimmers and seeing what they're doing, and when you're staring at them year after year, day after day, hour after hour, and you're staring at the people on the beach, you get to where it's a pattern recognition, and you see, without even really thinking about it, a few steps ahead if somebody's going to get into trouble. So that's certainly one of the benefits of being out there on a regular basis. Now, real quick, while we're talking about the rip currents, there's three major ways that somebody's going to get into trouble out in the ocean. And if this is good for people that are the uninitiated, and they're kind of thinking about what's going to happen to a patron when they get out there, and to get into trouble. Rip currents being one, that's probably the most dangerous. Number two is going to be, we're on the East Coast, west wind. Somebody gets on a float, and that west wind, it doesn't take much for somebody to get pushed out beyond their scope of swimming ability pretty quickly. just sitting on top of the water and letting that wind blow them out if they're not paying attention. The lifeguards aren't being proactive, which you know they are most of the time being very proactive. The reaction when the patron on the float notices they're out a little too far, depending on where they are, is either to paddle ineffectively to try to get back to shore against that breeze, or when that doesn't work, they're going to jump off the float, which I've always found to be an astounding reaction. But that's just it's you know, your panic sets in, and then people decide that that the best option is for them to jump off the float and try to swim back into shore when they can't swim anyway. So that's something they encounter. And the last one, just to give you some context of what these lifeguards are physical challenges and mental challenges that they're looking through. The third way that they're going to get into trouble on our specific beach, that the topography of the sea floor from, right where, the beachfront starts out to a sandbar, there's usually a little bit of a trough sometimes. And what'll happen is at low tide, and you'd mentioned tides earlier, they'll be able to walk out to that sandbar without a problem. So they'll walk in the trough, and the water in that trough will be chest deep, no problem. They'll walk out, they'll get out on a sandbar that's, 25 meters offshore, and they're having a great time. Everybody's standing up there in waist deep water. You're having fun. You're throwing a football, throwing a frisbee, whatever you're doing. Eventually that tide comes back in, and it fills in that sandbar, and it fills in that trough. And at the height of the season, you're looking at hundreds of people on this sandbar. Now, if only 20 of those people don't have the ability to swim back in when they hit that trough and that water is filled up and they're above their head, that can exhaust any lifeguard service. So you have to make sure that people understand, and you understand, that being proactive and making sure those people are off that sandbar and back onto the beach as the tide comes in, so they don't get overwhelmed by a water setting that they didn't exit the shore that way. They came back to water that was a little deeper than they expected. So that's usually what's lining up for lifeguards in general. One of those three things is what's going to be the bread and butter for a lifeguard service on the ocean front to encounter, to have to rescue a patron.
Where does surfing fit into that whole category as well? Because I know we get some of that over here on Ocean City, Assateague area. And, Ocean City, I think they have certain blocks that are designated surfing spots that way. Is that a new kind of element or different kind of challenge from a lifeguarding standpoint? Or does that kind of lump right in under that same category that you just outlined?
We do have surfing areas. It's always been there. There's areas that you have that are cordoned off just for surfing. The only real challenge is if you have a surfing area that's kind of in between two swimming areas, and the swimmers are getting into with the surfing area. So basically, the real problem with the surfer swimmer interaction is going to be trauma from a surfer, accidentally running into a swimmer, or a swimmer getting in the way of a surfer, depending on the situation. So they're beach to beach, they do things they do things differently, but our beach had a couple of different specific surfing areas, and conditions apply. If it's a red flag day, then generally it triggers the ability for people to be able to surf wherever they want along the ocean front. At least when I was working there, that was the case. But you still have to have some due regard for swimmers, because you're going to have swimmers out there regardless. So basically, people running into each other is the biggest risk factor for that. And that happens, but it doesn't happen too often.
Yeah, no, I got you. And that's the thing, as we were talking, right? To me, ocean rescue, lifeguarding, it's really emergency medicine on the water. And I think that's something that a lot of people forget, is the medical component of it. Is it's not just your ability to respond to something, but also provide, confident, sound medical care while doing so. And some of these situations, I'd imagine, get to be slightly stressful. You mentioned the mental element earlier. I'd imagine if you're on the beach on one of these big holiday weekends this summer and you've got thousands of people around and you're just trying to keep track of what's happening where, and then something does happen, it's a lot more trying when you factor in all these other components like weather, water conditions, crowd, and so on that way, as opposed to, something calm, cool, collected, that sort of thing. I think that all the other external factors also play a key role in all of this.
What we're doing here is drawing a picture for the listener to understand the dynamics of an ocean rescue environment versus a pool environment, which I did work in a pool in the wintertime for a few seasons in between while I was in college, in between the outdoor lifeguard season. And there are a lot of indoor and outdoor pool lifeguards that do a lot of good work, but that in my experience, the environment was a lot less dynamic, and you could easily pick out what was going to happen way before it happened in that environment versus the ocean environment, the beach environment. There's so much going on, so many people, that it adds a whole layer of complexity to the job itself.
It definitely does. And I think that's reflected in the difference in fitness tests as well. For a lot of the ocean beach patrol that way, there's a lot of different prerequisites that you have to meet physically just in order to get the job in the first place. And I think that's done for a combination of the safety of, the person that you're trying to help and rescue from a job standpoint, but also your own safety, because as you just outlined, the ocean itself is not overly forgiving. The conditions change every day. And even, talented, capable swimmers can sometimes be challenged by the conditions that the ocean can present you with. So what do you typically see from a, physical fitness requirement for testing purposes for ocean rescue that way? And do you feel that the requirements are sufficient? Do you feel like the testing is good, or do you feel like we could maybe add more to it? Or
well, let's talk about what the testing, and I'm going to paint with a broad brush, but most services are at a minimum, you're going to have a 500 meter or 550 yard swim, and it needs to be under 10 minutes. And I'm going to do a little bit of the old man talk and discuss how the testing has evolved. So I did my first lifeguard test in the very early 90s. At the time, it was done the week or so before Memorial Day. Now, you're on the East Coast. We're not far from each other. You know what the beach is like before Memorial Day. It can be cold, windy. Still, the water is in the 60s. At the time, our test was a run, swim, run, and everybody would show up at the beach. The boss would have a handful of popsicle sticks with 1 through 100 in his hand. There'd be 150 people that would show up, and they would have 2 buoys that were not scientifically, I don't think GPS was even a thing back then for most of us. So the buoys were dropped off where they were dropped off, regardless of the conditions. I feel like it was, in my mind, it was hurricane conditions with head high waves and lightning and, all the things. And the gun went off and they said, all right, run, swim, run, swim, run. The first 100 people, you get a popsicle stick and you're now a lifeguard. And it nearly killed me because I was not prepared. And I think, to be honest with you, I fared better in that environment because in a pool, you can just put your hand on the side of the wall and say you're done, or just stand up and you're done. But in the ocean, there's not that the benefit. So luckily for us, it was either finish the test or you were going to get rescued by one of your friends or colleagues or somebody that you know, embarrassingly. So I think for me, it was good that was the environment, because I was well below what I needed to be effective at the time. I didn't really have a lot of swimming and running background. but it was good that we were able to just kind of muscle through it. Not the safest way to do testing, and it's difficult logistically to get a lot of people at the same day, the same time to do the test. So it's evolved to where a lot of the testing is done in the pool, and it's the United States Life Saving Association has deemed the 500-meter swim in a pool or 550 yards in sub 10 minutes is going to be the gold standard for testing. There are some places that have a run test. We had a run test for a while. I think that has gone away in recent years. There are still some services that have a run test, so maybe a mile in 8 minutes. So nothing that any accomplished physical person that's in the physical culture can't accomplish. And there are some departments that'll do 1,000-meter swim. LA County, a 1,000-meter swim is their test. But so the testing itself really is just to get your foot in the door. It's not even, if you're somebody, I used to have the conversation regularly at the swim test at the pool, which again, back to the testing, the logistics of doing it in the pool are far safer. You can imagine it's a controlled environment. You can get more people. You don't have to worry about the weather, and you don't have to worry about people legitimately drowning while you're trying to get them to be a lifeguard, which is a real possibility if you get out in the open ocean. But I used to have the conversations with people that would come in right at the time frame of the they'll say they touch the wall at 9:59. And I explained to him, like, listen, this is the easiest swim you're going to have, because now we're going to transition to the open ocean. We're going to do training. You're going to have to do workouts in the morning. So that sort of stuff. So that's going to be the minimum, just to kind of get your foot in the door to get there. I think that folks need to really strive to be well beyond that. And the biggest advice I can give to young people is that they need to be experienced and comfortable in the environment that they're going to work. If you're going to work in a pool, then you need to be comfortable in a pool. If you're going to work at the ocean, you're going to work in an ocean environment, you need to, day one that you're sitting in a lifeguard stand can't be the first day that you've, done any significant swimming in the ocean, or be comfortable in the currents, the wave, the rip currents, the waves, all that good stuff. You need to at least be somewhat comfortable in that environment, or you're going to have a real problem. So do I think that the testing is enough? No, but in most jobs, is the testing ever really enough? I think that it's difficult for most occupations, certainly in the public safety space, to be able to capture enough in just the testing and still deal with the logistics and still deal with the multitude of people that are coming in that you have to test. So I think it's of the utmost importance that you can swim effectively and you're comfortable in the water, and then that tests that, and then we can kind of help to bring you along elsewhere.
Yeah, it sounds like the swim test and then occasionally the run test in certain settings are the two main components. There's not really any kind of strength testing or anything like that from what you outlined involved typically, is there?
Well, let me do this too. And I've gotten more comfortable in the last year or so to kind of have a hill to die on as far as strength conditioning goes with the tactical community. Specifically with the lifeguards, I think absolute strength is probably going to be the lowest priority as far as the physical adaptations that you need. I think all folks in the tactical space and the public safety space need to really focus on having a broad of an aerobic base as possible. You do need some strength. Strength in the lifeguard sense is going to be, I think, for resiliency, for injury prevention, and as we kind of dissect a rescue, you'll kind of see where having some strength is going to play a role. There are occasions where you're going to have to physically move somebody from waist deep water to, the drier part of the land to affect further medical care if needed. And that's not easy. You can imagine a limp 200-pound sunscreen covered swimmer. That's going to take, there's going to be a modicum of strength that's required. But I think that if you're a young person that is doing a significant amount of weightlifting to train to be a lifeguard, I think that you can get more bang for your buck focusing on aerobic capacity, cardiorespiratory fitness. And we'll that's going to come later in this conversation. We're going to kind of see where that comes into play.
Yeah, no, definitely. I love your point there. And that's something that I know you brought up earlier when we talked about firefighting in the first round is, having that base level aerobic endurance is absolutely essential. And I think that's something that's so overlooked. I'm guilty of it myself. I'm just like, oh, I'm 26, I work out, I'm in shape, I'm okay. And then I, do some sprint repeats or something and my heart rate's way up and I'm like, what, maybe I need to do more of this, right? I think having that base level endurance is absolutely essential. And as you mentioned, there are certainly some strength elements that definitely go into the job, but it's kind of difficult to test those, right? It's not like I guess we could have a test where you put someone on your back and you carry them, but it's like, is that really going to carry over the best from a lifeguarding testing standpoint? I think that, as you mentioned earlier, the test is a good thing, but in reality, the best way to become prepared for the job is to continue to spend time in the water and continue to train. This is a conversation I've had different times with some of the military population that I've worked with, where, there's no such thing as over-prepared. You're constantly training, you're constantly getting stronger, you're constantly getting faster, you're building your endurance, building your engine. There's never really that settling for, okay, I'm good enough for what I'm going to be doing from a work standpoint. It's constantly, how can we push the needle further forward? How can we move the needle forward to become, again, the best version of ourselves possible, to keep ourselves safe, but also to keep other people safe in this case as well.
Because in this environment, the military, the first responder, and specifically the lifeguards, a negative outcome could be life or death. And again, I don't want to get too dramatic, but that is the reality of the situation. If we're talking about a soccer game, all right, you didn't train well enough in adaptation X, whatever that may be, you got embarrassed in a soccer game and you lost the soccer game. And that is upsetting to some folks. This could be life or death. You could not get to a person that needs your help in time. And, that could be a real negative outcome. So that's why you can't be over prepared. I don't think that's, because the outcomes in the tactical space are different.
Yeah, no, definitely. Walk me through what training would look like to kind of prep for lifeguarding season, so to speak. How do you prep for the swim test and or the run test? And then how do you kind of program in the strength considerations that we talked about as well?
Well, let me diagram a rescue. And again, this is going to be municipality based, right? Okay. So the Outer Banks, let's just say Outer Banks has less density. So they're going to be more mechanized. They have more trucks, more ATVs. There's more space in between the lifeguard stands. So, that changes things. Now, our area is very densely populated and we have people that are close by. So a rescue is, I want you to imagine 50 meters in between lifeguards. And we'll take for any rescue, there's 3 lifeguards that go on that rescue. So there's some rescuer redundancy. We'd like to assume that between 3 young lifeguards, somebody's going to get out there quick enough to effect a rescue, and it provides safety for the lifeguards itself. But what'll happen is, lifeguard A will notice that there's somebody in trouble, and they'll call a rescue. That individual is going to have to go from they're sitting in a lifeguard stand, keeping themselves sunscreen, twirling a whistle for, hours at a time. And then snap of fingers, you are jumping off of a lifeguard stand 6 feet. You land on the ground. You turn either north or south. You're in a full sprint. And the situation, you will be in a full sprint. One, because you're amped up by the situation, and there's something intrinsic in human beings. They don't want to see other human beings drowned, and they don't want to see other human beings burn. So you hear all the time about people getting themselves injured trying to save somebody from drowning or save somebody from a burning building. It's just something about humans that we don't want to see that happen, and we will put it in the highest gear to get that taken care of. So you are going to be doing at least a 50-meter sprint cold as fast as you can. You're going to be bouncing you're going to be moving, you're going to be cutting, because when you're trying to get to where you're in front of the victim in the ocean, you've got people that are laid out on the beach. You got kids. The biggest hazard is going to be the kids that run from the soft sand to the ocean to fill their buckets full of water perpendicular to you while you're sprinting at full speed, running, north or south. So you're going to find yourself in positions of, I need to cut left, right. I might need to hurdle. I can think of a few times I've had to hurdle young kids at full speed, which, if I did that now, I'd be in the hospital for 3 weeks. But there was a time I was able to do that, and that does happen. You're trying to avoid holes, so there's a lot of agility aspect to it. You get in front of your victim, and you have to transition to, I've got to put my buoy strap over my shoulder. I've got to put fins on. Fins are important, in the ocean setting. So fine motor skills to swim out. You may swim out 50 meters, 100 meters. 99% of the time, the person's still going to be above the water, and you're going to be able to get the buoy between you and that person and hand it to them, and they're going to grab it, and they're going to hold on tight because they knew it was over, and they're holding on to anything that they can to keep them above water. You're going to have to turn back around, and you're going to have to tow underweight back to shore. But it's a little calmer at that point. You've got the victim, everybody's above water, and you can kind of downshift a little bit. But then you're getting to shore. Now that's the good side of it. Assuming they didn't go underwater, and you have to pull them up, you have to manhandle a person to get them on a buoy, get them above water, and then bring them back. And you may have to end up assisting carrying them off the beach. So, we're going to say day, on the continuum, you've got the day where you sit on the lifeguard stand and basically you're drinking Gatorade and twirling your whistle and sunning all day and not doing anything, to what I just articulated as far as a rescue happening multiple times in the day. So breaking that down to all the different pieces of that's required for you to be competent and effective in that environment is, we're going from cold to hot. That takes you need to have some flexibility, mobility. You need to have the tissue tolerance to be able to do that, to go from 0 to full speed instantly. Jumping and landing mechanics, right? Especially ladies. And you had mentioned the blonde 110-pound. I have seen 110-pound blonde young ladies save more lives than firefighters that I've worked with. So, I mean, there are some really, really good lifeguards that don't, that may not fit the David Hasselhoff 6'4", chest hair, but they're effective. But as we all know, the ACL issues with ladies sometimes that are untrained, the young ladies come a 6-foot jump down off the lifeguard stand to a little sand pile on the ground is certainly a great way for somebody to injure themselves. So you need to be able to have the requisite strength to be able to handle that sort of a load repetitively, day in and day out. And again, turning and cutting, the agility, going, making sure that you're not just plowing over some poor kid that gets in your way. You're not you're able to avoid patrons that are on the beach, people that are walking. And the big thing is, and here's where that aerobic base comes into play, is going to be the transition from that full sprint, high heart rate, you're breathing heavy, you've got plenty of oxygen that you can pull from. Now we're going into a swimming situation. So again, I talked about the fine motor skills. If you're not used to that physiological intensity, it's going to take you forever to get those fins on, to get that buoy. You're going to look foolish if you don't have that experience in some higher intensity, some higher intensity efforts. And then when you transition to the swim, that's usually where people really get into trouble, is that shift from full speed sprint into swimming, where you might not have the ability to breathe where you want to breathe or where you need to breathe. You're going through waves, your face is in the water. You may need to breathe, you may need to breathe every second because of what that sprint did to you, but now you're swimming, and you can imagine that that's going to be difficult, especially for those that don't have that aerobic capacity to kind of help them. They don't have that cardiac output. They don't have that VO2 max, that the ceiling is super high for them to be able to make that transition right into that swim without any real difficulty. Then you're swimming out, and muscular endurance, relative strength to muscle somebody up onto the buoy, and then bringing them back in. So, you can see all the different components that are involved in just one rescue, and there's nothing to say that that's only going to happen one time. That could happen 10 times in a day. It could happen no times in a day. It could happen 30 times in a day. And you need that aerobic capacity, and that aerobic base is going to help you in between rescues recover. So again, having the requisite strength to decelerate that eccentric load that you're going to take jumping off the lifeguard stand repetitively, having some experience with some higher intensity, and I'm talking 85, 95% max heart rate sprints, 50, 100 meters, repeats, to get yourself to where the rescue on the beach is not the first time that you've felt that way. The ability to recover quickly, transition into the swim, and then when you get to the victim, to be able to have the wherewithal to communicate with your other lifeguards to effectively get that person on the buoy, and then have the capacity to bring them back in maybe an environment that's not conducive to that. Lots of waves crashing around, currents, that sort of stuff. So big aerobic base, a good amount of strength for resiliency, the ability to understand and not be overwhelmed by a super high intensity, high power output evolution, and in switching into that swim is going to be huge. So luckily, most of these folks are young. So usually the tissue tolerance and all that good stuff is they're young. So they're not a 50-year-old guy like me that is brittle. They'll be able to kind of overcome that. But they need to have experience with the other stuff. A great thing for a young person, that to me sounds like a soccer game. It sounds to me like a longer term effort with little high burst of speed and energy in between, and having some experience in sports, having experience with a swim team. If you don't have access to a swim team, a master's program or something to kind of put you in the water or put you in these different environments, if you have access to a pool, put yourself in a high heart rate position and then get in the water and do a lap. Experience these things so you kind of understand how you're going to react, and you kind of get those things out of the way in training, to when you're in the moment, the crucial moment arrives, and you've got to go pull somebody out of a rip current. That's not the first time you've ever experienced these physiological demands. So that would be my big advice to people as far as training goes. Don't spend 90% of your time doing the bis and tris and the dead squat and press. You can still look good in the bathing suit and not spend all your time in the doing the curls and the tricep push downs. And make sure that you've experienced these demands and separately and together before you show up for work. And I think that'll make life a little easier and make you a more effective ocean lifeguard down the road.
Definitely. I completely agree. I mean, just kind of running that back from you kind of outlining the jump off, 6-8 foot drop that way. To me, that's a very high force, rapid eccentric load throughout the entire body. Now, I know people are going to say, oh, well, it's ankle strategy or it's hip strategy. But like, really, if you jump from high enough, you'll feel it pretty much everywhere. So very rapid, high force load. And we have to be able to accept that load, as you mentioned, with good mechanics, because we have to do this all summer long. This is not just a one weekend and then done kind of thing. From there, you mentioned going right into a sprint, which going 0 to 100 is very taxing on the body aerobically, as you mentioned, but also from the muscular standpoint. This is where I see a lot of people kind of present with those, to me anyways, with those like muscle strain type injuries when they're not adequately prepared to put a lot of force into the ground to get moving, and all of a sudden something just can't handle the load. And that's something, obviously, it's not too serious, but it's still something that can really sideline you and impact you in the short term. You mentioned that cutting contacts, and it's not just cutting to avoid, other people that might get in your way, as you mentioned, but it's also cutting on a potentially moving surface underneath you, right? Depending on the condition of the sand, you might be far enough out where the sand's wet and it's packed down really good, and you're kind of on more of a solid surface, but you also might be cutting from one direction to the next and landing on a surface that's going to slide and move, and it's a little bit more soft. So understanding that piece of it, and then you mentioned the swim as well. I think that run to the swim, as you mentioned, is certainly a very taxing piece. And it's certainly something that there's a lot of other involvements here as well. We're basically incorporating high force and fast force into a full body, full energy systems demand type of activity. I love your point from the training standpoint that there's more to this than just, go in the gym and hit your 4x25 arm farm. I do love me some arm farm myself. I'm guilty of it. And I think that there's a time and a place for it. However, I don't think that's the bulk of your training for lifeguarding. I also love your point on you have to do things to stress the system and shock the system a bit. And this is an area where it's a highly debated topic, but we talked about this with Ryan Murphy on the podcast earlier. This is an area I actually like the burpee. I know people hate on the burpee all the time, but if you want to stress the full system, go do 30 burpees. And then try and do anything afterwards. Do 30 burpees, then hit your sprint, then hit your swim. You're going to be exhausted. But that's the kind of thing that we need to do in order to prepare, in my opinion, for the demands of the job here. This is an area, too, where you mentioned the strength earlier. I think some of the quote-unquote strongman style training really shines here because, yes, there's a brute force and strength element, but there is a huge conditioning element to this as well. Try carrying a sandbag or a yoke or something like that for, 20 yards as fast as you can. You think it's going to be all strength. And then after like the 12 seconds it takes you, your heart rate's through the roof because you worked almost every muscle in your body to hold a heavy load, move a heavy load, and move it fast. So I certainly think that this is an element where some of that quote unquote tactical strength or strongman strength can really shine as well. And I like those odd object implements as well here because, you never know what the person you might be working to save is going to look like or present like, right? So having the ability to move a large object, a small object, an object that's going to move, the weight itself is going to shift as you're carrying it. I think all of those things just further prepare you for the potential job that you might be doing here.
Well, first let me go back to say I am a huge burpee fan under all circumstances. I am one of the few people that enjoy burpees and try to get them get them done as much as possible. So that I don't see any circumstance that a burpee is not appropriate. Number two, I also enjoy I think the strong man training is beneficial for. I mean, I don't know of any circumstance, general population, the public safety, tactical space. I think that's huge as well. But what I really want to hone in on anybody in any type of public safety is to make sure you put yourself in the position that you're going to find yourself in when the time comes, before it comes. That in the lifeguards have more. If I'm training a lifeguard, they have more in my opinion, they have more in common with training for law enforcement than they do the fire side, because law enforcement is sitting in a car for 3 hours, pulling somebody over, and then somebody squirts out of the car and boom, they're chasing, and they have to have the wherewithal to be able to think, communicate, and affect an arrest after that effort. And it's the same thing with the lifeguard. They have to be able to do that. So you have to find yourself in a position that you're in training, that you're going to kind of experience that physiology and make sure that when you're on the job, it's not the first time that you do that. Now, I'll be honest with you. I think that this conversation, as far as me breaking down a rescue and us talking about it on a granular level, I think it would be news to a lot of people that are thinking about, all right, I want to go be a lifeguard this summer, may not have thought that it through to be that particular, to have that many components to it to do. So I'm hoping, because I certainly didn't when I was coming through. I just wanted to kind of hang out on the beach. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But seeing what the components are, almost in a needs analysis, and then saying, okay, we need to kind of reverse engineer our training to be commensurate with the demands. And I think that's just hugely important. And you can do all of those things in the gym, but if you're not comfortable in the ocean, all of it's moot, because you're going to get out in the ocean and you're just going to panic like anybody else, and you're going to be, ineffective. So, my top priorities for people as far as training goes is make sure that you can swim, period. Then make sure you're comfortable swimming in the environment that you're going to be working, and then we start working into those physiological demands that we were, kind of peeling away the rescue part. So. I can't say enough about that being a great way over the winter for somebody to get prepared to do this in the summertime.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's absolutely essential, is you have to have that prep time. It's not just going to be tomorrow I can go and do this. It's, I might have to build up to it. It might take 8 weeks or 12 weeks of training or so on that way. And I know that's something you guys do at Kaizen, right? Like, you put those programs together and you specifically help people prepare for these type of roles and jobs and that sort of thing. So when that time comes, they are ready and prepared and so on that way. And it's not just being able to perform under optimal conditions, it's being able to perform in any condition. And the more prepared you are for that, the better you're going to be from a job and occupation standpoint, effectiveness and safety wise. On the training piece as well, I feel like I'd be doing the physical therapy field a disservice if I didn't mention, at least from the way I sit on things, I would love to come across the day when no one gets hurt and injured and I go out of business because no one needs physical therapy. With that in mind, I feel like for what we would see here, you mentioned about the cutting, the change of direction. I'm also thinking about the demands of the swimming, because I've treated a lot of swimmers with unstable shoulders. I think that in addition to the mechanics work and the strengthening and the loading and all that, just some very basic, this doesn't have to be anything fancy, some basic shoulder stability, some basic core work, all these simple things that a lot of times we kind of laugh at can really go a long way from a preventative standpoint. Basic rotator cuff strength, shoulder stability, that kind of thing can really help out here. And it's something that's so easy to incorporate into a program. It's like, hey, look, we'll put 5 minutes of that in the warm up. We'll put 2 exercises in a workout once or twice a week. And that could prevent someone from a serious injury that might lead them to, seek out services like I would offer that way. So it's the whole concept of prevention is sometimes the best medicine. And I think this is an area that we can certainly do that as well in for our lifeguards and responders that way.
And I think a lot of the folks that do this job are young folks, and they're usually self-selected for athletes that are already swimming, at least in my experience, or playing some sort of sport. So they may have encountered some sort of prehab in that's from their sport coaches as well. So but having this conversation has really kind of brought a smile to my face, because I'm thinking of how sophisticated strength and conditioning and physical therapy has become since 1992, 93, when this conversation would have been wizardry back then, as far as breaking down the needs of an ocean lifeguard and talking about prehab and shoulder stability. So I'm really happy for the younger folks that are coming along now. I think that they're going to be a much better product if they take the training and take that prehab seriously prior to starting to work for an agency.
Right. And the goal is not to overcomplicate this by any means, but the goal is to just kind of make sure that everyone is aware, clinicians especially, in my opinion, because as you mentioned, there are still PT clinics that are stuck in the 1980, 1990 mindset, where it's 4 to 5 patients at a time. Everyone gets a hot pack. Everyone gets a massage. We're going to do like 3 to 4 exercises, and we're never going to progress them, and so on that way. Like, that is still the standard at a lot of places. And that's unfortunately probably not enough to get someone back in this kind of setting, right? Like, we need to actually push the needle forward in order to get someone back to something demanding like ocean rescue and first response type activities. And I think that we really need to understand what they have to do first off, and second off, we need to load them sufficiently and make sure that they have the proper stimuli from a training standpoint that we offer to make sure that they are back and ready to go safely, and hopefully without any kind of pain or compensation or dysfunction or anything that way. And then most importantly, from my eyes, from a clinician standpoint, is I want to test them in some capacity. And I don't really have a ocean rescue return to sport test developed yet. But from my standpoint, I'd probably use something like a landing error scoring system that assesses mechanics. I might do a Y balance. I'm definitely doing some hop and jump testing and comparing left versus right asymmetries. I'm doing that upper body and lower body. I don't care if you come to me with a shoulder or a knee. I want to make sure everything is good, because I don't want you to come back to me in 3 months with a new injury. And I'm probably looking at some power development type characteristics upper body. So, a throw with like a weighted ball, left versus right distance. And I also really like to incorporate different things over time. So I might train someone with a yoke carry or a sandbag carry. But then that training might become the test. And we say, okay, well, here's a weight, here's the distance, carry it. And we have to do it in a certain amount of time, or, hey, we actually have to do it a certain number of reps, or we're going to do it as an AMRAP and you're going to go 5 minutes as much as you can here. The more data we can collect and assess that way, I think the safer and better off someone is going to be to return to activity following injury.
There's way, way more to this occupation than sitting up with your legs crossed and twirling the whistle and putting zinc on your nose. So I think that's going to be good for a lot of folks.
You mean it's not just a glory job of getting tan all the time, Lee?
Well, there is a significant aspect to that. I would be remiss if I didn't say that there is that is a layer to it. But when things go bad, they really can go bad. And that's the thing about the ocean is you know, uh, I was a firefighter paramedic for a long time, and I took a lot of people to the hospital, and there were a lot of times where you're like, I'm not 100% sure if I made any real difference in that person. But on the ocean, it's black or white, it's binary, it's 0 or 1. It can be milliseconds from that person did not go home to you were able to save them from drowning. So it's very, very important that that the stakes of that specific job is understood. And like I said before, the young lady who's 110 pounds, I have seen that same person save more lives than a firefighter in their entire career. And I know firefighters are going to lose their minds over that, but at the end of the day, I have honestly witnessed that. Just and that's how important it is, and that's why it's important for the athletes to think about the PT side of things and think about the strength and conditioning side of things to make sure that all of their encounters on the job are positive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Lee, for people who want to find out more about you and keep up to date with Kaizen and see everything that you're doing that way, where can they find you at?
Well, we did a little bit of a rebranding. We've changed to it used to be Kaizen Groundworks, we're Groundworks Hybrid Performance now, to kind of give people more of a idea of what we were doing. Groundworks Hybrid Performance on Instagram and Gmail. Same thing on the website. So really, the only thing that's changed is the name to kind of make it a little more familiar to people as far as what it is that we're doing in the space. I'm not hard to find in any of the social media platforms or online as well.
Awesome. We will link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click and see everything that Lee and his team are up to. Lee, I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing, man. This is great. Thank you.
I look forward to speaking to you again.